quiet. Observant people often seem mysterious to those around them. They don't rush to speak, don't interrupt, don't put themselves in the spotlight. And paradoxically, it's their opinion that starts to carry more weight. In their presence, conversation seems to slow down, excess noise falls away, and words take on a deeper, weightier quality. Meanwhile, they themselves don't demand special treatment, don't raise the subject of respect and status. They simply live by internal laws they don't need to explain to anyone. The paradox of respect is that it's born not where it's demanded, but where a person is honest with themselves and doesn't trade their conscience for approval. The harder someone clings to the need to prove their rightness, their significance, their necessity, the more fragile their inner core appears. Conversely, the more at peace a person is with the possibility that someone might underestimate them, misunderstand them, disapprove of them, the more clearly their internal foundation shows through. This phenomenon isn't based on magic or manipulation, but on deep psychological patterns. People instinctively gravitate toward those who don't put on a spectacle for attention, but simply remain steadily present in their own lives. This is what genuine self-respect looks like, when a person doesn't need to bargain with the world for the right to be themselves. But how does such a state form? Why do some people spiral into endless attempts to prove themselves to anyone and everyone, while others calmly endure even unfair judgment without falling apart? And what lies behind the quiet dignity of intelligent people at the level of the psyche, emotional memory, and deep-rooted defense mechanisms? The inner world of those who know how to command respect without proving anything is more complex than it appears from the outside. Externally, this might look like simple restraint, modesty, or even coldness. But inside there usually lives a person with high sensitivity to themselves and others. They track their own states well, catch the slightest shifts in mood, notice when they're burning out, and don't push themselves to the limit, though no one would guess it externally. For them, emotional honesty is as important as intellectual honesty. They can admit to themselves feelings of envy, fear, jealousy, their own vulnerability, without displaying these emotions outwardly in sharp words or demonstrative gestures. Such a person might appear quiet, but psychologically they're constantly analyzing something, comparing, checking against their own values. The intelligent person who proves nothing rarely lives for external evaluation. They have their own internal scale, what's right and what's unacceptable to them personally. It's to this scale they return when deciding whether to speak or stay silent, agree or refuse, stay or leave. Where someone else might begin justifying themselves, explaining why they acted this way, such a person can simply calmly repeat their decision, without pressure, but also without retreat. Their self-esteem rests not on applause, but on a sense of internal alignment. I did what I considered right, even if no one approved. These people rarely have endless justifications. They don't waste energy on long explanations for why they were late, why they didn't respond, why they didn't take on another obligation. Not because they don't care, but because they're not willing to live in a constant state of guilt toward everyone. When someone endlessly justifies themselves, they're implicitly admitting, "You matter more than me, your judgment is the verdict, and I'm already guilty." The intelligent person with inner backbone refuses to play this game. Their no might be quiet, but their very existence sets a new relationship format. I don't have to be convenient to be worthy of respect. In their internal logic, respect begins with how they treat themselves. They might criticize themselves, might examine their mistakes, but they don't humiliate themselves internally. In difficult situations, they're more likely to ask, "What did I overlook? What does this teach me?" rather than berate themselves for being not good enough. It's precisely this combination, sensitivity to one's own states plus a refusal to self-humiliate, that forms a particular psychological type, Externally calm, internally deep. Such a person has developed emotional intelligence. They notice what they feel themselves, recognize emotions in the tone and micro-movements of others, but don't rush to intervene or seek approval for understanding. They can be attentive and considerate while not dissolving into others' problems. They're distinguished by conscious relationship to their own boundaries. They intuitively feel when their energetic field is being used as a dump for others' negativity, and they withdraw gently but firmly. Meanwhile, everything looks peaceful from the outside. They don't shout, don't argue that they're being treated wrong, don't dramatize. They simply, at some point, stop entering into the same conversations, stop explaining the obvious, stop trying to convince those who don't want to listen. And the less they engage in the fight for recognition, the more those who are tired of shouting begin to listen to them. On the psychological level, this phenomenon is grounded in another important point. A person with quiet dignity rarely constructs a completely idealized self-image. They understand their weak points fairly well, their blind spots, habitual defensive reactions. This doesn't make them perfect, but it makes them real, first and foremost in their own eyes. When they see both strength and vulnerability in themselves, they don't need to frantically hide weaknesses from others, and therefore have less reason for panicked self-justification. Where someone else would grip a situation thinking, "I absolutely must show that I'm no worse," they can inwardly sigh and tell themselves, "Yes, I'm not strong here yet, and that's okay." This isn't passivity, but a different quality of movement, not from fear of being humiliated, but from the need to grow without constantly looking back at someone else's scale. This is why such people often seem to those around them to be slow, too calm, or even indifferent in moments of sharp conflict. Inside, there's actually complex work happening. They're checking whether they really need to engage in this argument now, what the price of this victory is, whether it will destroy their inner equilibrium. As a result, they enter into struggle rarely, but when they do say no or declare a position, they do it in such a way that even those who disagree can't help but factor in their opinion. Where most people live by the laws of external hierarchy, whoever speaks louder, whoever has more status is right. They rely on an internal vertical. I answer to myself for how I live, not for whether I'm considered convenient. Remarkably, this internal position directly connects to how respect works at the level of the psyche. Respect isn't a general, "he's a good person," but a very specific experience. Here he behaved the way I myself would want to be able to behave. We respect those whose actions confirm values important to us. When someone doesn't chase approval, but calmly follows their principles, they become a kind of anchor figure for those around them. Their presence reminds us, you can live without endless justifications and still remain in relationships, at work, in society. This is why, without explaining their nature in words, they become an unspoken reference point. People watch them, listen to them, read their reactions more carefully than the loud declarations of others. Yet people who prove a lot and constantly justify themselves often seem more alive and emotional. They actively participate in every conversation, try to explain why they're right, demand recognition. Look at how much I've done. Notice how hard I try. At first glance, they should command more respect. After all, they're doing so much. But the paradox is that behind their activity often lies not confidence, but hidden anxiety and fear of rejection. Their nervous system operates in constant verification mode. Am I good enough? Am I sufficiently respected? Any wrong expression on someone's face, any delayed response to a message, any remark can be experienced as a threat to self-esteem. In response, defense mechanisms activate, justifications, accusations, demonstrative devaluing of others or themselves. From the outside, this is sensed very quickly, even if no one puts it into words. People feel when someone next to them is internally trembling with fear of appearing insufficient. And instead of respect, what mostly appears is either pity, irritation, or a desire to distance themselves. The paradox: the more actively someone tries to prove they deserve respect, the more they reveal their internal insecurity. They're essentially telling the world, without your approval, I won't survive. And the psychology of other people, which values its own safety, responds to this with disrespect. After all, it's very hard to lean on someone who's barely holding on themselves. Quiet confidence, on the other hand, creates an effective safe space. When someone is calm and doesn't cling to proving themselves, their nervous system sends a different signal into the surrounding space. I'll survive your disagreement, your silence, your criticism. I won't collapse if you don't approve of me. Paradoxically, it's precisely this internal message that commands respect. It becomes clear this person won't manipulate feelings, won't cling, won't force others to endlessly confirm their value. You can be yourself around them without fearing that every no will turn into drama. But then how do intelligent people manage their image in others' eyes if they prove nothing? They do it not through direct attack, but through that very quiet adjustment, through subtle, nonverbal signals, through the quality of presence. Their words, movements, tone rarely contradict their internal experience. In psychology, this is called congruence, correspondence between what a person feels, thinks, and does. When someone says, "This doesn't work for me," in a calm voice, looking in the eye and not justifying themselves, the listener's brain reads this as stability and internal clarity. A long, rambling explanation of the same thing sends the opposite signal. I'm not even sure I have the right to do this. Nonverbal micro-movements reveal far more than seems possible. Shoulder position, breathing rate, direction of gaze, pauses between words. Intelligent people, not always consciously realizing it, learn to live in a body that doesn't betray their internal values. They speak more slowly than their anxiety urges them to, hold pauses where it would be easier to quickly justify, maintain an even posture where they'd like to either shrink or aggressively lean forward. All this creates an impression of being grounded. And people tired of chaos, loud reactions, and unpredictability begin to respect this internal composure, even when it sometimes irritates their ego. This is precisely where so-called energetic boundaries come into play. It's not mysticism, but quite understandable psychological reality. Each person has a limited resource of attention, emotion, strength. When someone has no boundaries, their attention and energy become common access. Anyone can come, talk it out, dump their tension, leave you feeling guilty. A person without boundaries adapts, justifies, invests more and more in relationships, and gets less and less recognition and respect. At some point, the psyche can't take it. Emotional exhaustion sets in. That very moment when someone can't and doesn't want to explain themselves to anyone, yet continues habitually carrying others' expectations. The intelligent person who proves nothing builds boundaries earlier, before the internal collapse happens. They feel the first signs of exhaustion, irritability without apparent reason, fatigue from socializing, a desire to disappear, to turn off the phone, a body's protest that doesn't want to talk to anyone. Instead of forcing themselves through willpower to continue being convenient, they listen to these signals as an early warning system. And they start gently but consistently reducing the circle of people to whom they feel obligated to explain their actions. They honestly acknowledge to themselves, I don't have to be understood by everyone. I can't survive if I endlessly justify myself. My energy is a finite resource, and I have the right to protect it. This stance creates a particular style of communication. Where something doesn't suit them, they don't throw out accusations, don't compile dossiers of past hurts, don't humiliate others. They simply say, "This doesn't work for me," and then act accordingly. If they're heard, they stay. If not, they leave, without making loud scenes or demanding immediate recognition of their rightness. From the outside, this might look harsh, even selfish. But in essence, it's a manifestation of intuitive protection, the ability to close in advance those doors through which energy loss becomes dangerous. And the more honestly they do this in relation to themselves, the stronger their sense of internal freedom becomes. Now, others' respect is not a survival question, but a natural consequence of how they live. Few notice that such internal boundary work changes not only emotional well-being, but the social dynamic around a person. When someone stops explaining the obvious, stops carrying relationships on their own shoulders, stops being convenient by default, they start being treated differently. Those around them gradually understand this isn't someone you can endlessly test, manipulate with guilt, or coerce through shame. Their quiet no is more often taken seriously than the loud demands of those constantly proving and claiming respect. Over time, the space around them seems to cleanse itself. Those capable of respecting boundaries stay nearby, while those accustomed to using others' kindness either leave or distance themselves. Another mechanism works within this process: social proof. When someone consistently maintains their boundaries without sliding into aggression, those around them see that it's possible. Someone starts trying the same thing in their own life. Someone at least stops thinking that being harsh with yourself is the only way to preserve relationships. As a result, the very fact that a person proves nothing but lives by their own rules becomes a sort of lesson for others. At this point, respect stops being just an emotion. It transforms into acknowledgement of someone else's internal work. They managed it, so it's possible, and I see that. Looking deeper at this path, something becomes noticeable. The intelligent person who stopped proving anything has gone through a certain internal evolution. At some point they, like most people, might have reacted painfully to any disagreement, burned with shame from criticism, spent nights replaying scenes where they were misunderstood. In early stages, many try to buy respect through excessive helpfulness, compliance, constantly exceeding expectations. The hope is that at least then they'll stop devaluing you, stop hurting. But the more a person sacrifices themselves for recognition step by step, the less of themselves remains inside. At some point, the psyche engages more severe defense mechanisms, either open protest and aggression or apathy and withdrawal. Those who break out of this cycle inevitably face an internal crisis. If I stop proving myself, will anyone stay? If I stop being convenient, will I be needed by anyone? These are very painful questions, but passing through them, someone gradually discovers that respect built on fear of losing someone always proves fragile and conditional. Just one time not fitting expectations, and it disappears. Then a new philosophy is born. Better fewer connections, but those where I'm respected not because I'm always right, but because I'm real. And from that moment, the internal direction shifts from the mode of endless proving into internal work on oneself. This doesn't mean the person becomes indifferent to how others treat them. Rather, they refuse to place others' respect above their own self-respect. They continue learning, acknowledging mistakes, changing behavior if they see they were wrong. But they do this not from fear of being abandoned, but from a desire for honesty with themselves. This is the main secret of intelligent people who command respect without proving anything. They don't give up on development, but stop developing for someone else's external evaluation. They choose to grow from within, not under the cameras of others' expectations. In this lies a deep truth about human nature. The respect we so crave from others always grows from how we treat ourselves. A person who constantly betrays their own feelings for approval teaches the world, treat me this way. A person who gently but firmly protects their energetic boundaries sends a different signal. Treat me differently, and the world responds to them differently. Ultimately, respect turns out to be not a medal pinned to your chest from outside, but a reflection of what place we give ourselves in our own lives. The more honestly we're willing to look at our fears, weaknesses, and need for approval, the less we need to prove anything to anyone. And if you try to honestly ask yourself the question that quiet, strong people ask themselves in crisis moments, it will sound like this: am I willing to live part of my life so that not everyone understands me, but I remain true to myself? The answer to it never comes easy, but it's this answer that determines whether we'll endlessly seek respect in others' eyes or one day start building our lives so that respect becomes a natural consequence of our path. Perhaps this is the very secret of intelligent people. They choose not to prove, but to be. And the more consistently they walk this path, the fewer words they need for the world to see in them what they've long already seen in themselves. At the end, it's useful to imagine a thought experiment. Someone enters a room where no one knows them. They have no title, no credentials, no one's seen their past achievements. In the first minutes, they have only one thing: how they're present. Their gaze, posture, pauses between words, calm or agitation, readiness to listen, or need to immediately announce themselves. Some in this situation will feverishly list what they do, what successes they've achieved, who they know. And someone will choose differently, calmly take their place, listen to others, ask a couple of precise questions, not rush to conclusions. After an hour, it's more often to the second person, surprisingly, that people gravitate, not because they spoke more, but because people sensed an internal anchor behind them. Each of us finds ourselves in such rooms daily, in new collectives,